Chapter 15. Ernst Malin shrank, as though trying to pull himself into himself, when he heard his name. He didn't want to testify. He had been dreading this moment for days. Now he would have to sit in that chair, and they would ask him questions, and he couldn't answer them truthfully, and the globe over his head. When the deputy marshal touched his shoulder and spoke to him, he didn't think at first that his legs would support him. It seemed miles, with all the staring faces on either side of him. Somehow, he reached the chair and sat down, and they fitted the helmet over his head and attached the electrodes. They used to make a witness take some kind of an oath to tell the truth. They didn't anymore. They didn't need to. As soon as the veridicator was on, he looked up at the big screen behind the three judges. The globe above his head was a glaring red. There was a titter of laughter. Nobody in the courtroom knew better than he what was happening. He had screens in his laboratory that broke it all down into individual patterns. The steady pulsing waves from the cortex, the alpha and beta waves, beta Aleph and beta Beth and beta Gimel and beta Daleth, the thalamic waves. He thought of all of them and of the electromagnetic events which accompanied brain activity. As he did, the red faded and the globe became blue. He was no longer suppressing statements and substituting other statements he knew to be false. If he could keep it that way. But sooner or later, he knew, he wouldn't be able to. The globe stayed blue while he named himself and stated his professional background. There was a brief flicker of red while he was listing his publication. That paper, entirely the work of one of his students, which he had published under his own name. He had forgotten about that, but his conscience hadn't. Dr. Malin, the oldest of the three judges who sat in the middle, began, "What, in your professional opinion, is the difference between sapient and non-sapient mentation?" "The ability to think consciously," he stated. The globe stayed blue. "Do you mean that non-sapient animals aren't conscious, or do you mean they don't think?" "Well, neither. Any life form with a central nervous system has some consciousness, awareness of existence and of its surroundings. And anything having a brain thinks, to use the term at its loosest. What I meant was that only the sapient mind thinks and knows that it is thinking." He was perfectly safe so far. He talked about sensory stimuli and responses, and about conditioned reflexes. He went back to the 1st century pre-atomic, and Pavlov and Korzybski and Freud. The globe never flickered. The non-sapient animal is conscious only of what is immediately present to the senses and responds automatically. It will perceive something and make a single statement about it. This is good to eat. This sensation is unpleasant. This is a sex gratification object. This is dangerous. The sapient mind, on the other hand, is conscious of thinking about these sense stimuli and makes descriptive statements about them, and then makes statements about those statements in a connected chain. "I have a structural differential at my seat, if somebody will bring it to me." "Well, never mind now, Dr. Malin. When you're off the stand and the discussion begins, you can show what you mean. We just want your opinion in general terms, now." "Well, the sapient mind can generalize. To the non-sapient animal, every experience is either totally novel or identical with remembered experience. A rabbit will flee from one dog because to the rabbit mind, it is identical with another dog that has chased it. A bird will be attracted to an apple, and each apple will be a unique red thing to peck at. The sapient being will say, these red objects are apples. As a class, they are edible and flavorsome. He sets up a class under the general label of apples. This, in turn, leads to the formation of abstract ideas, redness, flavor, etc., conceived of apart from any specific physical object, and to the ordering of abstractions, fruit as distinguished from apples, food as distinguished from fruit. The globe was still placidly blue. The three judges waited, and he continued. Having formed these abstract ideas, it becomes necessary to symbolize them, in order to deal with them apart from the actual object. The sapient being is a symbolizer, and a symbol communicator. He is able to convey to other sapient beings his ideas in symbolic form. Like, Papi Jacques? The judge on his right, with the black mustache, asked. The globe flashed red at once. Your Honors, I cannot consider words picked up at random and learned by rote speech. The fuzzies have merely learned to associate that sound with a specific human and use it as a signal, not as a symbol. The globe was still red. the Chief Justice, in the middle, rapped with his gavel. Dr. Mallon, of all the people on this planet, you at least should know the impossibility of lying under veridication. Other people just know it can't be done. You know why. Now I'm going to rephrase Judge Janiver's question, and I'll expect you to answer truthfully. If you don't, I'm going to hold you in contempt. When those fuzzies cried out, "Pappy Jack," do you or do you not believe that they were using a verbal expression which stood in their minds for Mr. Holloway? He couldn't say it. This sapience was all a big fake. He had to believe that. The fuzzies were only little mindless animals, but he didn't believe it. He knew better. He gulped for a moment. Yes, Your Honor. The term Pappy Jack is, in their minds, a symbol standing for Mr. Jack Holloway. He looked at the globe. The red had turned to mauve, the mauve was becoming violet, and then clear blue. He felt better than he had felt since the afternoon Leonard Kellogg had told him about the fuzzies. Then fuzzies do think consciously, Dr. Mallon? That was Pendarvis? Oh, yes. The fact that they use verbal symbols indicates that, even without other evidence. And the instrumental evidence was most impressive. The mentation pictures we got by encephalography compare very favorably with those of any human child of 10 or 12 years old, and so does their learning and puzzle-solving ability. On puzzles, they always think the problem out first and then do the mechanical work with about the same mental effort, say, as a man washing his hands or tying his neckcloth. The globe was perfectly blue. Mallon had given up trying to lie. He was simply gushing out everything he thought. Leonard Kellogg slumped forward, his head buried in his elbows on the table, and misery washed over him in tides. I am a murderer. I killed a person. Only a funny little person with fur. But she was a person, and I knew it when I killed her. I knew it when I saw that little grave out in the woods, and they'll put me in that chair and make me admit it to everybody, and then they'll take me out in the jail yard, and somebody will shoot me through the head with a pistol. And all the poor little thing wanted was to show me her new jingle. Does anybody want to ask the witness any questions? The Chief Justice was asking. Chapter 16. They stopped whispering at the door, turned right, and ascended to the bench, bearing themselves like images in a procession. Ruiz first, then himself, and then Janiver. They turned to the screen so that the public whom they served might see the faces of the judges, and then sat down. The court crier began his chant. They could almost feel the tension in the courtroom. Yves Janiver whispered to them, "They all know about it." As soon as the crier had stopped, Max Fane approached the bench, his face blankly expressionless. Your Honors, I am ashamed to have to report that the defendant, Leonard Kellogg, cannot be produced in court. He is dead. He committed suicide in his cell last night, while in my custody, he added bitterly. The stir that went through the courtroom was not shocked surprise. It was a sigh of fulfilled expectation. They all knew about it. How did this happen, Marshal? He asked, almost conversationally. The prisoner was put in a cell by himself. There was a pickup eye, and one of my deputies was keeping him under observation by screen. Fane spoke in a toneless, almost robot-like voice. At 22:30, the prisoner went to bed, still wearing his shirt. He pulled the blankets up over his head. The deputy observing him thought nothing of that. Many prisoners do that, on account of the light. He tossed about for a while, and then appeared to fall asleep. When a guard went in to rouse him this morning, the cot, under the blanket, was found saturated with blood. Kellogg had cut his throat by sawing the zipper track of his back and forth till he severed his jugular vein. He was dead. Good heavens, Marshal! He was shocked. The way he'd heard it, Kellogg had hidden a penknife, and he was prepared to be severe with Fane about it. But a thing like this... He found himself fingering the tooth track of his own jacket zipper. I don't believe you can be at all censured for not anticipating a thing like that. It isn't a thing anybody would expect. Janiver and Ruiz spoke briefly in agreement. Marshal Fane bowed slightly and went off to one side. Leslie Coombs, who seemed to be making a very considerable effort to look grieved and shocked, rose. Your Honors, I find myself here without a client, he said. In fact, I find myself here without any business at all. The case against Mr. Holloway is absolutely insupportable. He shot a man who was trying to kill him, and that's all there is to it. I therefore pray your honors to dismiss the case against him and discharge him from custody." Captain Greibenfeld bounded to his feet. "Your honors, I fully realize that the defendant is now beyond the jurisdiction of this court, but let me point out that I and my associates are here participating in this case in the hope that the classification of this planet may be determined and some adequate definition of sapience established. These are most serious questions, your honors." "But, your honors," Coombs protested, "we can't go through the farce of trying a dead man. People of the colony of Baphomet versus Jamshir Singh, deceased, charge of arson and sabotage, AE 604. The Honorable Gustavus Adolphus Branhard interrupted. "Yes, you could find a precedent in colonial law for almost anything." Jack Holloway was on his feet, a fuzzy cradled in the crook of his left arm, his white mustache bristling truculently. "I am not a dead man, your honors, and I am on trial here. The reason I'm not dead is why I am on trial. My defense is that I shot Kurt Borch while he was aiding and abetting in the killing of a fuzzy. I want it established in this court that it is murder to kill a fuzzy." The judge nodded slowly. "I will not dismiss the charges against Mr. Holloway," he said. "Mr. Holloway had been arraigned on a charge of murder. If he is not guilty, he is entitled to the vindication of an acquittal. I am afraid, Mr. Coombs, that you will have to go on prosecuting him." Another brief stir, like a breath of wind over a grain field, ran through the courtroom. The show was going on after all. All the fuzzies were in court this morning. Jack's 6, and the 5 from the constabulary post, and Ben's flora and fauna, and the 4 Ruth Ortherus claimed. There was too much discussion going on for anybody to keep an eye on them. Finally, one of the constabulary fuzzies, either Dillinger or Dr. Crippen, and Ben Rainsford's flora and fauna, came sauntering out into the open space between the tables and the bench, dragging the hose of a vacuum duster. Ahmed Khadra ducked under a table and tried to get it away from them. This was wonderful. Screaming in delight, they all laid hold of the other end, and Mike and Mitzi and Superego and Complex ran to help them. The 7 of them dragged Khadra about 10 feet before he gave up and let go. At the same time, an incipient fight broke out on the other side of the arc of tables between the head of the language department at Mallory Sport Academy and a spinsterish amateur phoneticist. At this point, Judge Pendarvis, deciding that if you can't prevent it, relax and enjoy it, rapped a few times with his gavel and announced that court was recessed. "You will all please remain here. This is not an adjournment, and if any of the various groups who seem to be discussing different aspects of the problem reach any conclusion they feel should be presented in evidence, will they please notify the bench so that court can be reconvened. In any case, we will reconvene at 11:30. Somebody wanted to know if smoking would be permitted during the recess. The Chief Justice said that it would. He got out a cigar and lit it. Mama Fuzzy wanted a puff. She didn't like it. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Mike and Mitzi, Flora and Fauna, scampering around and up the steps behind the bench. When he looked again, they were all up on it, and Mitzi was showing the court what she had in her shoulder bag. He got up, with Mama and Baby, and crossed to where Leslie Coombs was sitting. By this time, somebody was bringing in a coffee urn from the cafeteria. Fuzzies ought to happen oftener in court. The gavel tapped slowly. Little Fuzzy scrambled up onto Jack Holloway's lap. After 5 days in court, they had all learned that the gavel meant for Fuzzies and other people to be quiet. It might be a good idea, Jack thought, to make a little gavel when he got home and keep it on the table in the living room for when the family got too boisterous. Baby, who wasn't gavel-trained yet, started out onto the floor. Mama dashed after him and brought him back under the table. The place looked like a courtroom again. The tables were ranged in a neat row facing the bench, and the witness chair and the jury box were back where they belonged. The ashtrays and the coffee urn and the ice tubs for beer and soft drinks had vanished. It looked like the party was over. He was almost regretful. It had been fun, especially for 17 fuzzies and a baby fuzzy and a little black and white kitten. There was one unusual feature. There was now a 4th man on the bench in gold-braided navy black, sitting a little apart from the judges, trying to look as though he weren't there at all. Space Commodore Alex Napier. Judge Pendarvis laid down his gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to present the opinions you have reached?" he asked. Lieutenant Ibarra, the Navy psychologist, rose. There was a reading screen in front of him. He snapped it on. "Your Honors," he began, "there still exists considerable difference of opinion on matters of detail, but we are in agreement on all major points. This is quite a lengthy report, and it has already been incorporated into the permanent record. Have I the court's permission to summarize it?" The court told him he had. Ibarra glanced down at the screen in front of him and continued. "It is our opinion," he said, "that sapience may be defined as differing from non-sapience, in that it is characterized by conscious thought, by ability to think in logical sequence, and by ability to think in terms other than mere sense data. We, meaning every member of every sapient race, think consciously, and we know what we are thinking. This is not to say that all our mental activity is conscious. The science of psychology is based, to a large extent, upon our realization that only a small portion of our mental activity occurs above the level of consciousness. And for centuries we have been diagramming the mind as an iceberg, 1/10 exposed and 9/10 submerged. The art of psychiatry consists largely in bringing into consciousness some of the content of this submerged 9/10. And as a practitioner I can testify to its difficulty and uncertainty. We are so habituated to conscious thought that when we reach some conclusion by any non-conscious process, we speak of it as a hunch or an intuition and question its validity. We are so habituated to acting upon consciously formed decisions that we must laboriously acquire, by systematic drill, those automatic responses upon which we depend for survival in combat or other emergencies. And we are by nature so unaware of this vast submerged mental area that it was not until the 1st century pre-atomic that its existence was more than vaguely suspected, and its nature is still the subject of acrimonious professional disputes. There had been a few of those off and on during the past 4 days too. If we depict sapient mentation as an iceberg, we might depict non-sapient mentation as the sunlight reflected from its surface. This is a considerably less exact analogy. While the non-sapient mind deals consciously with nothing but present sense data, there is a considerable absorption and re-emission of subconscious memories. Also, there are occasional flashes of what must be conscious mental activity in dealing with some novel situation. Dr. Van Riebeek, who is especially interested in the evolutionary aspect of the question, suggests that the introduction of novelty because of drastic environmental changes may have forced non-sapient beings into more or less sustained conscious thinking, and so initiated mental habits which, in time, gave rise to true sapience. The sapient mind not only thinks consciously by habit, but it thinks in connected sequence. It associates one thing with another. It reasons logically and forms conclusions, and uses those conclusions as premises from which to arrive at further conclusions. It groups associations together and generalizes. Here we pass completely beyond any comparison with non-sapience. This is not merely more consciousness or more thinking, it is thinking of a radically different kind. The non-sapient mind deals exclusively with crude sensory material. The sapient mind translates sense impressions into ideas, and then forms ideas of ideas, in ascending orders of abstraction, almost without limit. This, finally, brings us to one of the recognized overt manifestations of sapience. The sapient being is a symbol user. The non-sapient being cannot symbolize, because the non-sapient mind is incapable of concepts beyond mere sense images. Ibarra drank some water and twisted the dial of his reading screen with the other hand. The sapient being, he continued, can do one other thing. It is a combination of the 3 abilities already enumerated, but combining them creates something much greater than the mere sum of the parts. The sapient being can imagine. He can conceive of something which has no existence whatever in the sense available world of reality, and then he can work and plan toward making it a part of reality. He can not only imagine, but he can also create. He paused for a moment. This is our definition of sapience. When we encounter any being whose mentation includes these characteristics, we may know him for a sapient brother. It is the considered opinion of all of us that the beings called fuzzies are such beings. Jack hugged the small sapient one on his lap, and Little Fuzzy looked up and murmured, "He inta? You're in, kid?" he whispered. "You just joined the people." Ybarra was saying, "They think consciously and continuously. We know that by instrumental analysis of their electroencephalographic patterns, which compare closely to those of an intelligent human child of 10. They think in connected sequence. I invite consideration of all the different logical steps involved in the invention, designing and making of their prawn-killing weapons, and in the development of tools with which to make them. We have abundant evidence of their ability to think beyond present sense data, to associate, to generalize, to abstract, and to symbolize. And above all, they can imagine, not only a new implement, but a new way of life. We see this in the first human contact with the race, which, I submit, should be designated as Fuzzy Sapiens. Little Fuzzy found a strange and wonderful place in the forest, a place unlike anything he had ever seen, in which lived a powerful being. He imagined himself living in this place, enjoying the friendship and protection of this mysterious being. So he slipped inside, made friends with Jack Holloway, and lived with him. And then he imagined his family sharing this precious comfort and companionship with him. And he went and found them and brought them back with him. Like so many other sapient beings, Little Fuzzy had a beautiful dream. Like a fortunate few, he made it real. The Chief Justice allowed the applause to run on for a few minutes before using his gavel to silence it. There was a brief colloquy among the three judges, and then the Chief Justice rapped again. Little Fuzzy looked perplexed. Everybody had been quiet after he did it the first time, hadn't they? It is the unanimous decision of the court to accept the report already entered into the record and just summarized by Lieutenant Ybarra TFN, and to thank him and all who have been associated with him. It is now the ruling of this court that the species known as Fuzzy Holloway Zarathustra is in fact a race of sapient beings, entitled to the respect of all other sapient beings and to the full protection of the law of the Terran Federation. He rapped again, slowly pounding the decision into the legal framework. Space Commodore Napier leaned over and whispered. All three of the judges nodded emphatically. The naval officer rose. "Lieutenant Ybarra, on behalf of the service and of the Federation, I thank you and those associated with you for a lucid and excellent report, the culmination of work which reflects credit upon all who participated in it. I also wish to state that a suggestion made to me by Lieutenant Ybarra regarding possible instrumental detection of sapient mentation is being credited to him in my own report, with the recommendation that it be given important priority by the Bureau of Research and Development. Perhaps the next time we find people who speak beyond the range of human audition, who have fur and live in a mild climate, and who like their food raw, we'll know what they are from the beginning. Bet Ybarra gets another stripe, and a good job out of this. Jack hoped so. Then Pendarvis was pounding again. I had almost forgotten. This is a criminal trial, he confessed. It is the verdict of this court that the defendant, Jack Holloway, is not guilty as here charged. He is herewith discharged from custody. If he or his attorney will step up here, the bail bond will be refunded. He puzzled Little Fuzzy by hammering again with his gavel to adjourn court. This time, instead of keeping quiet, everybody made all the noise they could, and Uncle Gus was holding him high over his head and shouting, "The winner! By unanimous decision!